The echoes of scuffling feet bounced off the concrete walls of the parking garage. Wesley Grant's fingers tightened around the wooden handle of his push broom, his eyes narrowing at the scene unfolding 20 yards away. 3 men in black tactical gear surrounding a woman in white, her blazer and pencil skirt pristine against the dingy gray of the garage. Her designer handbag clutched tightly to her chest. Vivian Black, the CEO whose heels had clicked imperiously through these halls just this morning, now backed against her luxury sedan, her composure cracking for the first time. Wesley's mind calculated distances, angles, vulnerabilities, habits from another life. The nearest attacker lunged for Vivian's arm. In one fluid motion, Wesley flipped the broom in his hands, the wooden handle becoming something far deadlier than a cleaning tool. Just a janitor, they'd called him. They were about to learn how wrong they were. In the fluorescent glow of the underground parking garage, Wesley Grant moved through his daily routine with the same methodical precision that had once guided him through hostile territories. At 38, his tall, muscular frame still carried the disciplined posture of his military days, even as he pushed a cleaning cart between the rows of executives' luxury vehicles. The standard-issue gray uniform of the maintenance staff hung loosely on his broad shoulders, but underneath, he wore an olive-green military undershirt, a small connection to the man he once was. His handsome face, weathered by experiences few could imagine, remained stoic as he swept away the day's debris, his movements economical and purposeful. The basement parking garage was his domain now, a far cry from the classified missions that had once defined his existence. But Wesley had made peace with this life. It gave him what he valued most, stability for his daughter Maisie. Every evening at 6, Wesley would hang up his maintenance uniform, drive his modest sedan to Oak Ridge Elementary, and transform back into the role that mattered most, Dad. Tonight was no different, as 8-year-old Maisie bounded down the steps of the after-school program, her backpack bouncing against her small frame, her eyes lighting up at the sight of her father. "Dad, I got to be lab assistant today," she exclaimed, climbing into the car with the boundless energy that never failed to brighten Wesley's quiet world. He smiled, the expression softening the hard lines of his face. "Tell me everything, scientist," he replied, his deep voice gentle in a way reserved only for her. As they drove home to their small but tidy apartment in the outskirts of the city, Maisie filled the space with animated stories of classroom experiments and playground politics, while Wesley listened with the attentiveness he once applied to mission briefings. Their evening ritual unfolded with military precision. Homework at the kitchen table, dinner prepared together, and then their special time, 30 minutes of reading before bed. Tonight, as Wesley tucked the blanket around Maisie's small shoulders, she looked up at him with curious eyes that reminded him so much of her mother. "Dad, Tyler says his dad was in the Army too, but he tells stories about it. Why don't you ever tell stories?" The question hung in the air, innocent yet cutting straight to the heart of the carefully constructed wall Wesley had built between his past and present. He gently brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Some stories aren't for telling, sweet pea. But maybe someday." He kissed her forehead and turned out the light, knowing the partial truth of his words. Some stories weren't for 8-year-old ears. Some memories were better left in the shadows where they belonged. After Maisie fell asleep, Wesley moved through the apartment with silent footsteps, checking locks and sightlines out of habit. His neighbors in the building knew him as the quiet, dependable single dad who fixed leaky faucets and helped carry groceries. Mrs. Abernathy next door often commented on his such good manners and occasionally tried to set him up with her niece. What they didn't know was that he could disarm a man in 3 moves, or that he slept with a tactical knife within reach. Mrs. Abernathy noticed him more. They didn't know about the nightmares that sometimes woke him, drenched in sweat, reaching for a weapon that was no longer there. They didn't know about the wife he had lost, Julie, whose smile he still saw in their daughter's face. For 4 years since her death from an unexpected aneurysm, Wesley had lived half a life, existing primarily for Maisie and finding purpose in the simplicity of their routine. The morning brought news that rippled through the maintenance staff at Blackwood Enterprises. The CEO herself would be conducting an inspection of all company properties. Wesley listened to his co-workers' nervous chatter as they hurriedly polished floors and wiped down surfaces that hadn't seen such attention in months. "She's a real ice queen," muttered Collins, who had worked security for 10 years. "Brilliant as hell but cold as winter. Called the whole board functionally obsolete last quarter and fired 3 VPs in one day." Wesley simply nodded and continued his work. Executive drama meant little to him. He had seen enough real conflict to know that corporate politics were just elaborate games played by people who had never faced actual life or death stakes. At precisely 10:45, the executive elevator doors opened, and Vivian Black stepped into the basement level, flanked by 2 assistants frantically taking notes on tablets. At 34, she had already built Blackwood Enterprises into one of the most formidable technology firms in the country, her reputation for strategic brilliance matched only by her exacting standards. Her white blazer and skirt were impeccably tailored to her slender frame, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized her sharp cheekbones and intense brown eyes. Wesley watched from the periphery as she inspected the facilities, her gaze missing nothing, her questions precise and penetrating. There was something in the tightness around her eyes that spoke of exhaustion, carefully concealed, a weariness that her pristine exterior couldn't quite hide. Wesley continued his work, becoming nearly invisible as executives often rendered service staff. He swept methodically near the elevator banks, close enough to observe but not so close as to draw attention. He noticed how Vivian's assistants flinched when she pointed out inadequacies, how the maintenance supervisor stammered through explanations about budget constraints. He also noticed how she listened, truly listened, despite her intimidating demeanor. When she asked about staffing levels and safety protocols, there seemed genuine concern beneath her businesslike tone. As the inspection group moved toward the security office, Wesley rounded a corner and nearly collided with a small figure who had wandered away from the after-school tour group that occasionally visited the building. "Whoa there," Wesley said, steadying Maisie by the shoulders. His daughter looked up with wide eyes, clearly not expecting to find her father here. "Dad, I was looking for the bathroom and got lost, and then I saw you," she exclaimed, her voice echoing slightly in the concrete space. Wesley knelt down, automatically scanning for the rest of her class. "Your group is upstairs, sweet pea. How did you get all the way down here?" Before Macy could answer, the click of heels announced Vivienne's return. She stopped, taking in the scene of the maintenance worker and the small girl. "This area is restricted," she said, her tone clipped. Then, noticing the familial resemblance, her expression shifted slightly. "Is this your daughter?" Maisie, never shy, stepped forward with the confidence of a child who had been taught her own worth. "I'm Maisie Grant. My class is touring the building because we're learning about businesses. Are you important here? You look important." Wesley watched as surprise flickered across Vivian's face, quickly replaced by something softer. "I'm Vivian Black. I run this company," she replied, her tone gentler than it had been all morning. Maisie's eyes widened. "You're the boss of everything? Even my dad?" When Vivian nodded, Maisie beamed. "That's so cool. Girls can be anything. That's what my dad always says." For the first time that day, perhaps longer, Vivian Black smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face from merely beautiful to radiantly human. The unexpected moment was interrupted by a frantic teacher calling Maisie's name from the elevator. Wesley quickly explained the situation, assuring the flustered woman that his daughter was fine. As Maisie rejoined her class, she waved goodbye to both her father and the CEO, completely unaware of the impression she had left. Wesley turned to find Vivian watching him with curious eyes. "You've raised quite a remarkable young lady, Miss Grant." "Wesley Grant. And thank you, she's the best of me," he replied simply, then added, "I should get back to work." Vivian nodded, her professional mask slipping back into place, but not before Wesley caught a glimpse of something wistful in her expression. As she walked away, white handbag swinging gently at her side, Wesley returned to his broom, pushing away the unexpected connection that had briefly brightened the subterranean space. The inspection concluded late in the afternoon. Wesley watched from a distance as Vivienne dismissed her assistants, instructing them to take the elevator up while she made a phone call in privacy. She walked toward her reserved parking space, white designer handbag clutched in one hand, phone in the other. Wesley was emptying trash bins when he noticed 3 men entering the garage from the service entrance. men who didn't belong to the maintenance or security teams. Something in their purposeful stride and the way they scanned the area triggered Wesley's dormant instincts. He set down his trash bag silently, observing as they spotted Vivian and began moving toward her with too much intent to be coincidental. Vivian was unlocking her car when the first man approached. Wesley moved closer, still appearing to be working but tracking every movement. He heard the man ask for directions, a common ploy, and saw Vivian's brief annoyance as she glanced up from her phone. The moment she registered the threat, it was almost too late. The other two men had flanked her, one grabbing for her arm while another reached inside his jacket. "Get in the van or this gets messy," the first man hissed, gesturing toward a dark vehicle idling near the exit ramp. Vivian's eyes flashed with fear and defiance as she clutched her white handbag to her chest like a shield. "I don't know what you want, but we want you to shut up and come quietly," the man interrupted, reaching for her. What happened next unfolded in a blur of precise violence that had once been Wesley's daily reality. The push broom in his hands became a staff, then a battering ram, then a precision instrument. He crossed the distance in seconds, driving the wooden handle into the first attacker's solar plexus, with enough force to fold the man in half. As the man dropped, gasping for breath, Wesley was already moving to the second attacker, redirecting the man's reaching arm into a joint lock that ended with a sickening crack. The third man managed to draw a weapon, a stun gun, but Wesley's foot connected with his wrist before he could deploy it, sending the device skittering across the concrete floor. A precise strike to the throat left the third attacker choking and disoriented. In less than 30 seconds, all three men were incapacitated on the cold concrete floor. Wesley stood protectively in front of Vivian, his breathing controlled, his stance ready for any additional threats. The training that had lain dormant for years had reactivated without conscious thought, muscle memory taking over when needed. He scanned the garage, ensuring no other attackers lurked in the shadows, before turning to Vivian. She stood frozen, her white outfit somehow still immaculate, her eyes wide with shock and something else. Recognition that the quiet maintenance worker had just revealed himself to be something else entirely. "Are you hurt?" Wesley asked, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Vivian shook her head, unable to find words as she stared at the three men groaning on the ground and then back at Wesley. "We need to call security and the police," he continued, already reaching for the garage emergency phone. His movements were efficient, his report to the security desk clear and concise, giving their location and the situation without emotion or embellishment. As sirens wailed in the distance, Wesley turned back to Vivian, who had recovered enough of her composure to straighten her blazer and take a steadying breath. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just the maintenance guy," Wesley replied, already stepping back, retreating into the shadows of his anonymous existence. Before she could question him further, security personnel flooded the garage, followed shortly by police officers. In the chaos that followed, Wesley gave his statement with minimal detail, describing what he had seen and done in the most ordinary terms possible. He mentioned his self-defense training and acting on instinct, but volunteered nothing about his military background. As the police led away the handcuffed attackers and paramedics checked Vivian for injuries, Wesley slipped away, clocking out at the end of his shift as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He picked up Maisie from school, made dinner, read stories, and tucked her in, the sacred routine that anchored their lives continuing uninterrupted. But as he sat alone in the quiet apartment later that night, cleaning his tactical knife out of habit, Wesley knew that the carefully constructed wall between his past and present had begun to crack. 3 days passed with no mention of the incident from management. Wesley went about his duties, sweeping floors, changing light bulbs, and fixing minor issues throughout the building. If he occasionally felt eyes on him or noticed security personnel watching him with newfound respect, he gave no indication. On the 4th day, as he was checking the emergency exit lighting in a seldom-used stairwell, the door above him opened and Vivian Black descended the stairs alone. She had traded her white ensemble for a dark blue dress, but her presence was no less commanding. "Mr. Grant," she said, stopping a few steps above him. "I've been looking for you." Wesley straightened, setting aside his toolbox. "Ms. Black? Is there a maintenance issue I can help with?" A small smile touched Vivian's lips. "I think we're past that pretense, don't you?" She descended the remaining steps until they stood on the same level. "I did some research. Special Forces, 3 tours, Distinguished Service Cross, and now you're changing light bulbs in my building." Wesley's expression remained neutral, though inwardly he tensed. "It's honest work." Vivienne studied him with those penetrating eyes. "The police report says you subdued 3 armed men using a broom. The security footage was more revealing. You could have killed them all in seconds." It wasn't a question, but Wesley answered anyway. That wasn't necessary. Containment was sufficient. They stood in silence for a moment, each measuring the other. Finally, Vivienne spoke. "I need someone I can trust. Someone with your particular skill set. My security team failed spectacularly last week, and the police investigation suggests this wasn't a random kidnapping attempt. Someone targeted me specifically." Wesley shook his head before she could continue. "I'm not for hire, Ms. Black. Not in that capacity anymore." Vivian's expression hardened slightly. "I'm offering you triple your current salary to act as my personal security consultant for 1 month while I identify who's behind this. You'd work regular business hours, only—" "I understand you have a daughter." Wesley hesitated, thinking of the tuition bills for Maisie's school, the tight budget that left little room for emergencies. Still, he shook his head. "I left that life behind for a reason." Vivian's carefully controlled facade slipped, revealing a flash of genuine vulnerability. "Please, I haven't slept since it happened. I keep seeing their faces, feeling their hands." She stopped, composing herself with visible effort. "I don't trust easily, Mr. Grant, but I trusted you the moment you stepped between me and danger without hesitation." Wesley looked away, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Anyone would have helped." Vivian laughed, a short, humorless sound. "We both know that's not true. 20 people work in that garage. Security cameras show at least 3 others who saw what was happening and did nothing." She reached into her purse and handed him a business card. "Think about it. Call me by tomorrow if you change your mind." That evening, as Wesley helped Maisie with her math homework, his mind kept returning to Vivian's offer and the fear he had glimpsed beneath her composed exterior. Maisie, perceptive beyond her years, noticed his distraction. "Dad, you're thinking so loud I can hear it," she said, poking his arm with her pencil. Wesley smiled, focusing back on the fractions worksheet. "Sorry, sweet pea, just work stuff." Maisie tilted her head, studying him with eyes so like her mother's it sometimes took his breath away. "Is it about the lady in white? The one who runs your building?" Wesley's surprise must have shown on his face because Maisie rolled her eyes. "Amber's mom works in the office upstairs. She told Amber that you saved the boss lady from bad guys." Wesley sighed, making a mental note about workplace gossip reaching elementary schools. "It wasn't quite like that." Maisie closed her math book, giving him her full attention. "But you did help her? When she was scared?" Wesley nodded reluctantly. "Yes." Maisie considered this, her small face serious. "And now she needs more help?" Wesley raised an eyebrow. "How do you know that?" Maisie shrugged. "Because she looked scared when I met her. Not on the outside, but in her eyes. Like Mrs. Abernathy after her husband died." The simple observation, delivered with a child's unfiltered honesty, hit Wesley with unexpected force. "She asked me to help her for a while, but it would mean changing my work schedule." Maisie thought for a moment, then nodded decisively. "You should help her, Dad." When Wesley started to explain the complications, Maisie interrupted with the devastating clarity only children possess. "Mom always said helping scared people is what makes you special." Wesley fell silent, remembering Julie's words from years ago, after he had intervened to stop a mugging outside a restaurant where they were celebrating their anniversary. That night, she had looked at him with pride and said those exact words. Somehow, Maisie had absorbed that moment and carried it forward, a living connection to the woman they had both loved. The next morning, Wesley called the number on Vivian's card. Her assistant put him through immediately, as if his call had been expected. "I'll do it," Wesley said without preamble. "But I have conditions. I work 7 to 4 so I can pick up my daughter from school. I maintain my maintenance position as cover, and I'm not carrying a weapon in the building." There was a brief silence on the line. "Agreed," Vivian replied, her tone businesslike but with an undercurrent of relief. "Can you start today?" Wesley looked down at his gray maintenance uniform, thinking of the changes this decision would bring to the careful life he had constructed. I already have. For the first week, Wesley shadowed Vivian discreetly, observing her routine, identifying vulnerabilities, and assessing potential threats. To the outside world, he remained the maintenance worker who occasionally fixed issues in the executive suites. But his eyes missed nothing. Not the rivalry between Vivian's CFO and COO, not the resentment from the board members she had recently overruled, not the strange timing of her assistant's phone calls. He compiled mental notes on everyone who approached her, categorizing them by risk level and possible motives. Vivian, for her part, maintained her icy professional demeanor in public, but began to show glimpses of the woman behind the executive facade when they were alone. In her office after hours, reviewing security protocols, Vivian surprised Wesley by asking about Maisie. "She's quite extraordinary. You must be very proud." Wesley nodded, allowing himself a small smile. "She's everything good in my life." Vivian hesitated, then asked, "And her mother?" The question hung in the air between them. Wesley looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city lights below. Julie died 4 years ago. Aneurysm. No warning. He could have left it at that, should have, professionally speaking, but something compelled him to continue. She was a kindergarten teacher. She loved puzzles and rainy days and terrible sci-fi movies. She laughed at all my jokes, even the bad ones, especially the bad ones. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry for your loss," she finally said, the corporate platitude somehow genuine in her voice. Then, offering something in return, "My parents were rarely present, physically or emotionally. Success was the only acceptable outcome in our house. Failure meant disapproval, which was worse than punishment." She traced a finger along the edge of her desk. "I built this company to prove something, I suppose. Now I'm not sure what, or to whom." The confession, unexpected and unguarded, created a fragile bridge between them. Two people who had armored themselves in different ways, against a world that had taught them painful lessons. As days turned into weeks, Wesley found himself drawn deeper into Vivian's world, a landscape of power plays, strategic maneuvering, and constant performance. He watched how she navigated board meetings and investor calls with brilliant precision, her mind always 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. But he also saw the toll it took, the long hours, the rare moments of doubt when she thought no one was watching, the lonely dinners ordered to her office at 9 p.m. Once, arriving early, he found her asleep at her desk, vulnerable in a way that made something protective stir within him, a feeling he had reserved exclusively for Maisie since Julie's death. Their professional relationship developed a rhythm, punctuated by moments of unexpected connection. When Vivian's car service was delayed one evening, Wesley offered to drive her home. The 20-minute journey passed in comfortable conversation about books they had both read, cuisines they enjoyed, places they hoped to visit someday. For those brief minutes, they were simply two people, not employer and employee, not CEO and former soldier. As he pulled up to her elegant townhouse, Vivian hesitated before opening the door. "Would you and Maisie like to come in for dinner sometime as a thank you?" The invitation hung between them, laden with possibilities neither was ready to acknowledge. "Maybe someday," Wesley answered, his tone gentle but establishing a necessary boundary. The investigation into Vivian's would-be kidnappers hit a dead end with the police, but Wesley's own careful observation began to yield disturbing patterns. The 3 men had been hired muscle with criminal records, but no clear connection to Vivian or Blackwood Enterprises. However, their attack had coincided perfectly with a momentary gap in the security camera footage, a gap that could only have been orchestrated by someone with inside knowledge of the building's systems. More troubling were the financial irregularities Wesley discovered while reviewing the company's security budget, discrepancies that pointed to someone skimming substantial sums right under the board's collective nose. Late one night, after Maisie was asleep at Mrs. Abernathy's apartment next door, Wesley returned to Blackwood to access security footage that wasn't available remotely. The offices were dark and silent as he made his way to the security suite, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. He didn't expect to find Vivian still in her office. the blue light of her computer screen illuminating her face as she pored over financial reports. She looked up, startled by his appearance. "Wesley? What are you doing here?" He explained his suspicions about the security breach and the financial discrepancies, watching as her expression shifted from surprise to focused calculation. "Show me," she said, rising from her desk. Together they reviewed the evidence Wesley had compiled, the tampered footage, the suspicious transactions, the timeline that suggested coordination and insider knowledge. "Someone close to you is involved," Wesley concluded, watching her face carefully. "Someone with access to both the security systems and the financial records." Vivian's face paled as the implications sank in. "That narrows it to 4 people, including my CFO and head of security." Her voice remained steady, but Wesley could see the betrayal cutting deep. This was more than a physical threat. It was a violation of the carefully constructed world she had built, through years of strategic brilliance and relentless work. "What do we do?" she asked, and the question struck Wesley with its significance. Not "what do I do," but "what do we do?" A partnership formed in crisis. "We set a trap," he replied, already formulating a plan that would draw out the traitor without putting Vivian at further risk. "But first, you need to act normal. Give no indication that you suspect anything. Can you do that?" Vivian straightened her shoulders, her momentary vulnerability replaced by steely determination. "I've been playing corporate poker since I was 25, Mr. Grant. I can certainly manage a convincing bluff." Her use of his surname, a step back to formality, was a reminder to them both of the professional nature of their arrangement, despite the personal trust developing between them. Over the next 3 days, Wesley and Vivian executed their plan with precision. She announced a fabricated breakthrough in the company's quantum computing division, a development that would dramatically increase Blackwood's market value once made public. The information was shared only with the 4 suspects, each told in confidence with slightly different details that would serve as fingerprints if leaked. Wesley, meanwhile, enhanced security around Vivian while appearing to maintain routine. The trap was baited. Now they waited for someone to take it. The betrayal came faster than either expected. James Harrington, Blackwood's CFO and Vivian's mentor from her earliest days in the industry, made a series of encrypted calls to an offshore number, followed by unusual movement in his personal investment accounts. "I can't believe it's James," Vivian said quietly as they reviewed the evidence in her home office, away from the corporate environment that might have ears. "He recruited me out of business school. He backed me for CEO when the board wanted someone with more experience." Wesley watched as she processed this betrayal, her analytical mind trying to make sense of the personal hurt. "People's motivations change," he offered. "Financial pressure, resentment, opportunity. Sometimes it's a perfect storm that pushes someone to cross a line they never thought they would." Vivian looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Is that what happened to you? A perfect storm that pushed you out of one life and into another?" The question was unexpected, cutting closer to Wesley's carefully guarded past than he was comfortable with. After a long silence, he answered, "In a way. After Julie died, I couldn't reconcile the man I was in combat with the father Maisie needed. Every mission, every kill, it all seemed so distant from the bedtime stories and lunchboxes that became my world." He hadn't spoken these words aloud to anyone, yet they flowed naturally in the quiet sanctuary of Vivian's home, under the weight of her own vulnerability. "So I walked away, traded one kind of service for another." Vivian nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. "We all have our breaking points, the moments that force us to choose who we really are." She reached across the table, her hand briefly touching his, the first physical contact between them that wasn't professionally necessary. "Thank you for choosing to help me find mine." The final confrontation came sooner than they had planned. Wesley was picking up Maisie from school when he received an urgent text from Vivian. "Harrington wants meeting now, says it's about security breach, coming to office." Warning bells immediately rang in Wesley's mind. The confrontation should have happened on their terms, not Harrington's. "Sweet pea, change of plans. We need to stop by my work for a bit," he told Maisie, who was buckling her seatbelt. Her eyes widened. "Is it the lady boss? Is she in trouble again?" Wesley managed a reassuring smile. "Just a work thing. You can show me your art project in the car." As they drove, Wesley called Mrs. Abernathy, arranging for Maisie to stay with her if necessary, while mentally preparing for whatever might await at Blackwood Enterprises. When they arrived, the executive floor was unnaturally quiet. Wesley instructed Maisie to stay in the break room with her backpack and snacks, promising to check on her every 15 minutes. Then he made his way toward Vivian's office, his senses heightened, aware of every sound and movement around him. Through the glass walls, he could see Vivian seated at her desk, facing Harrington, whose back was to the door. Their body language was tense, confrontational. Wesley approached silently, close enough to hear their voices through the partially open door. "You've built something remarkable, Vivian, but you've grown too powerful too quickly. There are interests that find your ethical stance inconvenient," Harrington was saying, his tone almost regretful. Vivian's eyes flicked to Wesley as he appeared in the doorway, but she gave no other indication of his presence. "So this isn't about money, it's about control?" she asked, keeping Harrington's attention focused on her. The older man shrugged. "Money, control, they're two sides of the same coin. The attempt in the garage was regrettable but necessary. You were meant to be frightened enough to step down, not kidnapped. Those idiots got overzealous." Wesley had heard enough. He stepped into the office, closing the door behind him with a soft click that made Harrington whirl around. "Mr. Grant," the CFO said, his surprise quickly masked by a professional smile. "This is a private meeting." "Not anymore," Wesley replied, moving to stand beside Vivian's desk. "We know about the security breach, the financial diversions, the offshore accounts. It's over, Harrington." The CFO's facade cracked, his genial expression hardening into something cold and calculating. "You have no idea what forces you're dealing with, maintenance man. This goes beyond one company or one CEO." His hand moved toward his jacket pocket, and Wesley tensed, ready to intercept a weapon. Instead, Harrington pulled out his phone. "One call, and not only is Vivian's career over, but your daughter, Maisie, isn't it, will find her father suddenly of great interest to certain government agencies. Your dishonorable discharge wasn't as buried as you think." Wesley froze, the carefully constructed story of his past crumbling under Harrington's smug revelation. He had never told Vivian the full truth, that his last mission had gone catastrophically wrong when he disobeyed a direct order to save civilians that his commanding officer had written off as acceptable collateral damage. The military had buried the incident to avoid scandal, but Wesley had paid with his career and nearly his freedom. Now somehow Harrington had unearthed this secret. Beside him, Vivian stood slowly, her expression unreadable as she processed this new information about the man she had trusted with her life. The moment stretched, taut with unspoken implications, until a small voice broke the silence. "Dad?" Maisie stood in the doorway, her backpack clutched to her chest, eyes wide as she took in the tense scene. "You said 15 minutes, but it's been 22. The sight of his daughter, innocent, vulnerable, the center of his reconstructed life, crystallized everything for Wesley. In one fluid movement, he closed the distance to Harrington, disarming the threat not with violence, but with quiet, immovable certainty. "Make your call," he said, his voice low. "But understand this. There is nothing I wouldn't do to protect my daughter. The man I was before, he's still here, right beneath the surface." Harrington paled, recognizing the lethal promise in Wesley's eyes, the look of a man who had faced death and dealt it in equal measure. But it was Vivian who took control of the situation, stepping forward with the composed authority that had built her empire. "It's too late anyway, James. While you were threatening us, the board was receiving evidence of your embezzlement and corporate espionage. The police are already on their way." She held up her phone, displaying an active call to her head of legal. "I learned from the best. Always have contingencies for your contingencies." Harrington's face contorted with rage as he lunged toward Vivian, but Wesley intercepted him with practiced ease, subduing the older man with a simple joint lock that brought him to his knees, just as security personnel flooded the office. In the aftermath, as police led Harrington away and security secured the building, Wesley found himself standing in Vivian's office with Maisie pressed against his side. Vivian knelt to eye level with the little girl, "You were very brave coming to check on your dad," she said gently. Maisie nodded solemnly. "He always checks on me when I'm scared, so I check on him too." The simple statement brought an unexpected tightness to Wesley's throat. Vivian smiled, a genuine, warm expression that transformed her face. That's what people do when they care about each other. They show up. Her eyes lifted to meet Wesley's, the words carrying a weight that went beyond the moment. Later that evening, after the statements had been given and the immediate crisis contained, Wesley sat with Vivian on a bench outside the building, watching as the city lights began to illuminate the darkening sky. Maisie was inside with Vivian's assistant, enjoying the executive break room's hot chocolate machine with the delight only an 8-year-old could muster. "Were you going to tell me?" Vivian asked quietly. "About the discharge?" Wesley looked down at his hands, calloused from tools rather than weapons these days. "Eventually. Maybe. It's not something I'm proud of." Vivian was silent for a moment. Disobeying an order to save innocent lives seems like something to be proud of, actually. Wesley turned to her, surprised by her understanding. "How did you know that part?" Vivian smiled slightly. "I have resources too, you know. I did my own research after you saved me in the garage. Your commanding officer was later investigated for multiple ethical violations." She hesitated, then added, "You're a good man, Wesley Grant. Better than most I've known." The compliment, delivered without agenda or expectation, settled something restless within him. "Does this mean my consulting job is over?" he asked, attempting to lighten the moment. Vivian laughed softly. "I think we're just getting started, actually, if you're willing." The ceremony was modest. No press, no speeches beyond what was necessary. Just a quiet unveiling at a local community center. A plaque, simple and clean, mounted on the wall beside the front entrance. The Julie Grant Scholarship Fund, for the children of those who serve, in memory of a life lived with love. It was Vivienne's doing. No press release, no corporate branding, just a check written in silence and a name offered with reverence. The fund would cover tuition and supplies for children of veterans, the kind of kids Julie used to teach, the kind she would have fought for. Wesley stood beside her, his hands loosely clasped behind his back. He didn't speak much that day, but he didn't need to. The weight in his chest had shifted, not lifted entirely, but softened. Maisie tugged gently on his sleeve, pointing to the framed photos of the first scholarship recipients inside the center's lobby. One of them had drawn a crayon thank you note. She found that deeply important. Later that afternoon, Wesley returned to the apartment and opened a box he hadn't touched in years. Inside, a few medals, a photo of Julie, his old field watch, still scratched at the bezel. He didn't bring them out to relive the past. He brought them out to release it. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Vivian stopped by with grocery bags and a dish she insisted was homemade. Wesley didn't ask if it was. Maisie set the table with quiet pride. 3 plates, not 2. No one labeled it a family, but something unspoken settled into the room like warmth in winter. No grand declarations, no dramatic gestures. Just 3 people choosing, in their own quiet ways, to show up for one another. And for the first time in a long while, that was more than enough. The alarms wailed through the 5th floor of Harrison Technologies. Red lights pulsed in sync with the klaxon's screech. Men and women in tailored suits and starched shirts gathered around computer screens, their faces bathed in the electronic glow of impending disaster. The company's firewall had been breached, a sophisticated attack unlike any they'd seen. On every monitor, the same message flashed in crimson. Customer data was being extracted in an algorithmic assault that bypassed every defense system they had. A digital countdown showed just 3 minutes remaining before the breach would be complete. The head of IT threw his hands up in defeat. In the corner of the boardroom, a voice emerged from an unexpected source. Small, hesitant, but somehow sure. A child's voice. "I think I know how to stop it." The room fell silent as every head turned toward the small figure. An 8-year-old girl with auburn hair and knowing eyes that seemed much older than her years. 1 hour earlier, Wesley Parker stood in the vast marble lobby of Harrison Technologies, his palm damp with nervous sweat as it held his daughter's tiny hand. At 38, He still cut an impressive figure, tall, with shoulders that spoke of an athlete's past, though the dark circles beneath his eyes revealed a different story. His navy suit had been pressed the night before, a ritual of hope that this interview might finally be the one to pull him from the financial abyss that had threatened to swallow him and Maisie since his wife's death. The receptionist glanced up from behind a sleek desk of polished chrome and glass, her professional smile faltering as her gaze fell on Maisie. "Mr. Parker, I see you've brought company." The last word dripped with judgment. Wesley straightened his already rigid spine. "My childcare arrangements fell through last minute. I hope it won't be a problem." Behind him, 3 other candidates waiting for their own interviews exchanged glances, their suppressed smiles communicating what their voices didn't. One woman whispered to her neighbor, just loud enough for Wesley to hear. "Someone didn't read the room." The receptionist sighed heavily. "I suppose it can't be helped now. Please have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." Wesley guided Maisie to a chair, crouching down to meet her eyes. "Remember what we talked about? Quiet as a mouse." Maisie nodded solemnly, her small hands clutching the worn backpack on her lap. Inside was the tablet Wesley had sacrificed, a month's grocery budget to purchase, loaded with coding games he'd designed to keep her mind occupied during long waits. In her top-floor office, Claire Harrison watched the scene unfold on her security monitor. At 35, she'd built Harrison Technologies from a struggling startup to one of the most respected cybersecurity firms in the country. Her office, minimalist, dominated by glass and steel, reflected the precision with which she approached everything in life. On her desk sat a single photograph, Claire shaking hands with the governor at last year's Technology Innovation Awards. No family photos, no personal touches. Her expression remained neutral as she observed Wesley and his daughter, but something in her eyes lingered on them a moment longer than necessary. She tapped her desk intercom. "Judith, who's the candidate with the child?" Her assistant's voice replied promptly, "Wesley Parker, interviewing for the senior security analyst position, former lead engineer at CyberShield." Claire's finger hovered over the button. "His resume?" "Impressive background, but a 3-year employment gap." Claire released the button without further comment, her gaze returning to the monitor. Something about the man's posture, protective yet dignified, caught her attention. In her world of algorithms and firewalls, human elements were often the most unpredictable variables. Wesley had once been the rising star at CyberShield, pioneering security protocols that had become industry standards. He remembered the corner office with the view of the city skyline, the respect in colleagues' eyes, the comfortable life he had provided for Sarah and their newborn Maisie. Then came the call that changed everything. Sarah's car, the rainy highway, the truck driver who'd fallen asleep at the wheel. In the hospital corridor, still in his presentation suit, he'd made his decision even before the doctor had finished speaking. Maisie would not lose both parents to corporate America's insatiable appetite for time and attention. He resigned the following day, cashed out his stocks, and became a full-time father to a 1-year-old who cried for a mother she would never remember. The life insurance payout had sustained them longer than expected, but after 3 years, the financial reality had become impossible to ignore. Their apartment was modest, a 2-bedroom unit in a neighborhood that had seen better days. Each night, after tucking Maisie into bed with stories of her mother's courage and kindness, Wesley would open his laptop and search job listings until his eyes burned. The technical world had continued its relentless evolution during his absence, leaving him scrambling to learn new languages, new protocols, new security paradigms, through online courses taken during Maisie's nap times and after her bedtime. That morning, as he had knotted his tie, Maisie had appeared in the doorway of the bathroom, already dressed in her neatly pressed blue dress, her backpack ready. "You'll get this one, Daddy," she'd said, with the unwavering certainty of childhood. "I know it." Wesley had smiled, ruffling her hair, wishing he could borrow some of her confidence. When the babysitter called to cancel, a sudden flu, he'd nearly given up, but Maisie had simply taken his hand and said, "I can be good, I promise." And so here they were, their futures balanced on the knife edge of professional judgment. The interview room felt instantly hostile. 4 evaluators sat across a polished conference table, their expressions ranging from surprise to thinly veiled disdain as Wesley entered with Maisie in tow. "Mr. Parker," began the oldest of the group, a man with silver at his temples and coldness in his eyes. "This is highly unusual." Wesley guided Maisie to a chair in the corner of the room. "I understand, and I apologize. My sitter canceled at the last minute and I didn't want to miss this opportunity." He handed Maisie her tablet, whispering instructions to stay quiet. The interviewers exchanged glances that communicated volumes. This candidate had already failed. The questions began like artillery fire. "Explain the 3-year gap in your employment. How familiar are you with the advancements in cybersecurity since you left the field? Do you honestly believe you can step back into a senior role after such an extended absence?" Each question was designed to expose weakness, to justify the decision they'd already made. One interviewer barely looked up from his phone during Wesley's responses. Another checked her watch repeatedly. Maisie sat silently in her corner, her eyes moving from face to face, missing nothing. Her small fingers occasionally swiping across her tablet screen, not playing games as the interviewers assumed, but actually running simple diagnostic programs her father had taught her, learning about network architecture as naturally as other children learn nursery rhymes. Wesley maintained his dignity through it all, answering with clarity and confidence despite the undercurrent of dismissal that permeated the room. "After my wife's death, I chose to focus on raising our daughter. During that time, I've kept up with industry developments through online courses and independent consulting work. My skills haven't diminished. They've adapted." The female interviewer raised an eyebrow. "Adapted how exactly?" "Quantum encryption protocols have completely transformed the security landscape in the past 18 months alone." The lights flickered midway through Wesley's response about zero-knowledge-proof implementation. The overhead fluorescents blinked once, twice, then dimmed as emergency lighting activated. A high-pitched alarm began to sound throughout the building. The interview panel looked at each other in confusion until the door burst open. A young man in a rumpled button-down shirt, the company logo embroidered on the breast pocket, rushed in. "We're under attack," he gasped, his face pale with panic. "All systems compromised. Someone's bypassed every firewall we have." The interview forgotten, the panel members scrambled to their feet. More staff rushed in, laptops clutched in desperate hands. On every screen, the same cascading failure. Defenses falling like dominoes, customer data being siphoned into the digital ether. The countdown timer appeared. 5 minutes until complete system breach. Wesley and Maisie were pushed to the side, forgotten in the crisis as executives streamed into what had now become the center of disaster response. Through the glass walls, Wesley could see similar panic erupting across the office floor. Security analysts frantically typing, managers shouting into phones, the ordered world of corporate technology dissolving into chaos. Then came a commanding presence, Claire Harrison herself, striding into the room with the controlled urgency of someone who had faced crises before. "Status report," she demanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. As the head of IT babbled explanations, Wesley felt a tug on his sleeve. Maisie was looking up at him, her eyes wide but focused. "Daddy," she whispered, "I think I know what they're doing. It looks like the game you made for me, the one where you have to find the hidden door." Wesley hesitated, watching the room full of professionals failing to address a threat that was second by second destroying everything they had built. He raised his hand like a schoolboy, his voice almost lost in the cacophony. "Excuse me." No one turned. "Excuse me." Louder this time. A few heads swiveled in his direction, annoyance clear on their faces at this interruption from the forgotten interview candidate. "My daughter, she thinks she might be able to help." The statement was met with disbelief. Someone laughed, a short, harsh sound quickly swallowed. "Maybe we should call in a kindergarten class to help," muttered one executive. Claire Harrison, however, had gone completely still. Her eyes moved from Wesley to Maisie, a calculation happening behind them that no one else could see. "Let her try," she said finally, her voice cutting through the objections before they could form. "We have nothing to lose at this point." The room fell silent as Claire herself walked over to Maisie, gesturing toward the main terminal. "Show us," she said simply. Maisie approached the computer with the quiet confidence of someone entering familiar territory. Her small fingers flew across the keyboard, executing a series of commands that seemed impossible for her age. She navigated through layers of code with intuitive ease, finding patterns in the chaos that had eluded the professionals. "The attack is coming through a back door in your update server," she explained, her child's voice incongruous with the technical language. "It's using your own authentication protocols against you." With methodical precision, she isolated the intrusion pathway, creating a containment perimeter around the breach. The countdown slowed, then stopped. The data extraction halted. System by system, the network stabilized as Maisie executed her final commands. The room had fallen into a stunned silence, broken only by the sound of her typing. When she finished, she looked up at the circle of adult faces staring down at her. "It's fixed now," she said simply. "But you should probably change your root passwords. They're not very good." The IT director pushed forward, checking the systems with frantic energy. "She's right," he confirmed, his voice thick with disbelief. "The attack has been neutralized." His eyes shifted to Maisie with newfound respect. "She found a backdoor vulnerability that we didn't even know existed. One that would have been virtually impossible to detect without intimate knowledge of our architecture." Claire Harrison moved closer to Wesley, her professional mask now layered with something new. Curiosity, perhaps even respect. "Your previous role at CyberShield," she said, her voice lowered for his ears alone. "You worked on kernel protection protocols, didn't you?" Wesley nodded, watching his daughter as she explained something to the gathering of IT professionals, who now hung on her every word. "Yes, I developed several of the underlying security frameworks that are still industry standards." Claire studied him with new intensity. "And your daughter? Has she received formal training in programming?" Wesley smiled slightly. "No, she taught herself, using my old laptop. She has a gift for seeing patterns, for understanding systems. I created simple games to teach her the basics, but she quickly surpassed what I was teaching." Claire nodded slowly, her gaze shifting back to Maisie. Without another word, she turned and left the room, but Wesley noticed the change in her posture. Something had shifted in her assessment, not just of him, but of the small girl who had accomplished what her entire security team could not. The silver-haired interviewer approached Wesley, his earlier condescension replaced by a strange mixture of embarrassment and awe. "Mr. Parker, I believe we may have misjudged you and your unusual circumstances." Wesley maintained his dignified composure, though inside a small flame of vindication had sparked to life. "Perhaps we should continue our interview another time," he suggested. "I believe your company has some security updates to implement." 3 days later, an email arrived in Wesley's inbox that he had to read 3 times to believe. Not only was he being offered a position at Harrison Technologies, but it was for a role on their most classified initiative, the Gatekeeper Project, developing next-generation security protocols for critical infrastructure. The salary was double what he had expected. Attached was a second offer, a place for Maisie in the exclusive Young Innovators program that Claire Harrison personally sponsored, a technology education initiative for gifted children that was typically reserved for the offspring of political figures and technology elites. Wesley sat at his kitchen table, the glow of his laptop illuminating his face in the pre-dawn darkness, reading the offers again and again. Maisie slept in her room, unaware that her life was about to change completely. He thought of the years of struggle, of stretching dollars until they screamed, of the nights spent wondering if he'd made the right choice in stepping away from his career. He thought of Sarah and what she would say if she could see their daughter now. Not just smart, but extraordinary in a way that demanded the world make room for her gift. The following day, Wesley found himself in Claire's office, the city spread out below them through floor-to-ceiling windows. The office was striking in its lack of personality, no art on the walls, no plants, nothing to indicate the person behind the position. Claire stood with her back to him, looking out at the skyline. "I don't trust resumes, Mr. Parker," she said without turning. "I trust people who step up when everyone else is stepping back." She faced him then, her expression carefully controlled. "What your daughter did was extraordinary, but it also exposed critical vulnerabilities in our systems that we should have caught." I need people who see what others miss. Wesley felt something loosen in his chest, a tension that had been his constant companion for 3 years. This means everything to us, he said simply. For just a moment, something flickered across Claire's face, a flash of emotion quickly contained. Sometimes, she said quietly, the best talents are the ones we overlook. The statement seemed to carry more weight than its surface meaning. But before Wesley could respond, she had moved on to discussing the details of his role, the professional mask firmly back in place. Weeks passed, and Wesley settled into a rhythm at Harrison Technologies. The Gatekeeper project was challenging work that demanded the best of his abilities, but for the first time in years he felt fully alive in his professional capacity. The team he led was developing security protocols that would protect power grids, water systems, and transportation networks from the kind of attack that had nearly crippled Harrison Technologies itself. His colleagues, initially skeptical of the comeback kid, as one had dubbed him, quickly came to respect his innovative approaches and the depth of knowledge he brought to the project. Maisie thrived in the Young Innovators program, coming home each day bubbling with new knowledge and achievements. "Dad, I learned about quantum entanglement today," she would announce, proceeding to explain concepts that most adults would struggle to grasp. They had moved to a better apartment closer to the office, and the financial pressure that had been Wesley's constant companion had finally lifted. He began to notice small changes in his interactions with Claire Harrison. Where initially their meetings had been strictly professional, focused entirely on the project, she had begun to linger afterward, asking questions that went beyond work parameters. "How is Maisie adjusting to the program?" she asked one evening, as they reviewed security protocols after the rest of the team had gone home. Wesley looked up from his notes, surprised by the personal nature of the question. "She loves it. She's always been quick to learn, but having actual guidance rather than just figuring things out on her own, it's made a world of difference." Claire nodded, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the conference table. "And you? How are you managing both work and parenting?" It was the first time she had acknowledged the dual nature of his life. "It's easier now," Wesley admitted. "Having financial stability means I can be more present for her, not constantly worried about our next meal or rent payment." He paused, then added softly, "And I think she's proud of me again. That matters more than I expected it would." The conversation shifted, becoming something neither of them had anticipated, an actual exchange between two people rather than two professionals. Wesley found himself sharing stories of his hardest days as a single parent, the time Maisie had a fever of 104 degrees, and he'd sat up all night beside her bed, terrified and alone. The parent-teacher conferences where he felt the absence of Sarah like a physical pain. The birthdays where he tried to be both mother and father to a little girl who only knew her mother through photographs and stories. "The hardest part," he confessed, "is knowing that no matter what I do, there's a gap in her life I can never fill, a perspective I can never provide." To his surprise, Claire began to reciprocate with small revelations of her own, her rise through the male-dominated tech industry, the sacrifices she had made for her career, the relationship with a business partner who had ultimately betrayed her, stealing both her trust and her intellectual property. "That's why Harrison Technologies has such rigorous security," she explained, a rare vulnerability showing through her composed exterior. "I learned the hard way that trust must be verified." She described nights spent rebuilding her company from the ashes of betrayal, the isolation of leadership, the weight of knowing that hundreds of employees and thousands of clients depended on her decisions. "People see the success," she said, swirling the remains of her coffee. "They don't see the cost." The revelation shifted something between them, a mutual recognition of wounds carried privately, and the strength required to move forward despite them. They were, Wesley realized, both survivors of different shipwrecks, still learning to navigate with damaged compasses. Late one night, after a particularly tense meeting regarding a potential security breach that proved to be a false alarm, Claire and Wesley found themselves alone in the conference room. The office was empty, the city lights creating a constellation of human activity beyond the windows. They sat in companionable silence, the pressure of the day slowly dissipating in the quiet. "I never thought I'd say this," Claire said finally, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "But your daughter..." She makes me feel safe. Wesley looked at her, surprised by the admission. How so? Claire smiled slightly, her professional armor momentarily set aside. In a world where we're constantly vulnerable to invisible threats, where every system can be compromised, she reminds me that there are minds out there capable of seeing the problems before they destroy us. Minds that approach problems without the limitations we've taught ourselves. She paused, her fingers lightly tapping against her coffee cup. And she reminds me that not everyone with extraordinary abilities is looking to exploit them for personal gain. She looked directly at Wesley then, her gaze unguarded for perhaps the first time since they'd met. She gets that from you, I think, that integrity. Wesley felt warmth spread through his chest at the unexpected praise. And I never thought anyone in that interview room would actually listen, he admitted. You were the only one who saw past the circumstances to the possibilities. The moments stretched between them, an unspoken connection neither was quite ready to name. Then Claire straightened, her professional demeanor sliding back into place like a shield. The project timeline needs to be accelerated, she said. And just like that, they were colleagues again. But something had shifted. A foundation laid for whatever might come next. As summer faded into autumn, small changes began to appear in their daily interactions. Claire would bring coffee for Wesley when she arrived in the morning, remembering exactly how he took it. 1 sugar, splash of cream. Wesley noticed when Claire skipped meals during intensive work periods and would ensure food appeared on her desk without comment. Simple, nourishing things that could be eaten with one hand while continuing to work. They developed a shorthand in meetings that sometimes left other team members struggling to follow their rapid exchange of ideas. The Nash approach? Claire would ask, and Wesley would shake his head. Too vulnerable on the Eastern Front. I'm thinking more layman with a Tanaka modification. And Claire would nod, immediately understanding the direction he proposed. Maisie became a frequent topic of conversation, her progress in the program, her unique approaches to technological problems, her insights that sometimes left her instructors baffled. She created an entirely new encryption algorithm yesterday, Claire mentioned one afternoon. Her instructors are still trying to break it. Wesley laughed. That's my girl making trouble. With each conversation, each shared moment of success or concern, the walls that Claire had built around herself seemed to lower slightly. The staff began to notice. Whispers circulated about the change in the CEO, how she sometimes smiled at Wesley's jokes in meetings, how she had been seen eating lunch in the cafeteria rather than alone in her office, how she had actually taken a weekend off for the first time in years. Wesley found himself looking forward to their interactions in a way that went beyond professional satisfaction. One afternoon, as they worked side by side debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code, their hands brushed. The contact lasted only a second, but Wesley felt it like an electrical current. Claire's typing faltered for just a moment before resuming its steady rhythm, the only indication that she had felt it too. As autumn deepened toward winter, the Gatekeeper project entered its final testing phase. The team had created something revolutionary, a security system that adapted to threats in real time, learning from each attack attempt to strengthen itself, much like a human immune system. Wesley had led the development with a brilliance that had cemented his reputation within the company. No longer was he seen as the comeback story, the single dad who'd gotten lucky. He was respected for his mind, for his vision, for his ability to see vulnerabilities others missed. Maisie had become something of a mascot for the Young Innovators program, her achievements celebrated in company newsletters. One evening, as the first snow of the season dusted the city, Wesley worked late, finalizing the presentation for the project's official launch. The office had emptied hours ago, only the cleaning staff moving quietly through the darkened corridors. A soft knock on his door made him look up. A year or two ago, Wesley had been happy to take. Claire stood there, holding 2 cups of steaming tea. Thought you might need this, she said, entering his office. She looked different, softer somehow, her usual tailored suit replaced by a simple sweater and slacks, her hair loose around her shoulders, rather than pulled back in its customary severe style. Thanks, Wesley said, accepting the cup gratefully. Just putting the finishing touches on tomorrow's presentation. Claire sat in the chair across from his desk. curling her legs beneath her in a surprisingly casual posture. "It's going to change everything, you know," she said, her eyes bright with rare animation. "What we've built here, it's not just another security product, it's a new paradigm." Wesley nodded, understanding her excitement because he shared it. "I never thought I'd be part of something like this again," he admitted. "After Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over." Claire studied him over the rim of her cup. "You found your way back." It wasn't a question, but Wesley answered anyway. "With help. With someone willing to take a chance on me." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, acknowledgement of a journey shared, of mutual respect that had grown into something neither had anticipated. Months passed, the seasons changing outside the glass walls of Harrison Technologies, while inside, the Gatekeeper project moved from development to implementation. Wesley had fully reclaimed his professional identity while creating something new, a balance between the dedicated father he had become and the innovative engineer he had always been. Maisie continued to flourish in the Young Innovators program, regularly sending her father text messages during the day, got the highest score on the encryption challenge, or simply, "They said I'm breaking records." Claire had remained Claire, focused, brilliant, demanding, but those who had known her longest noticed subtle differences. She smiled more readily. She occasionally left the office before midnight, and her interactions with Wesley Parker had developed a warmth that sparked speculation among the staff. One morning, Wesley arrived late to the daily project briefing, having dealt with a minor emergency at Maisie's school. As he slipped into the conference room, apologizing for his tardiness, Claire looked up from her presentation. "I think I've gotten used to having you around, Mr. Parker," she said, the formal address belied by the warmth in her voice. "Try not to make a habit of disappearing." The team chuckled, but Wesley caught the glint in Claire's eyes, something playful and genuine that had been absent when they first met. He smiled in return, a silent acknowledgement of how far they had come. "Wouldn't dream of it, Miss Harrison," he replied, matching her tone exactly. The moment passed, the meeting continued, but something had been communicated between them. Not a declaration, but a possibility, a door left deliberately open. Later that day, they stood together in the company's demonstration room, watching as the Gatekeeper system successfully repelled a simulated attack of unprecedented complexity. As the test concluded successfully, the team erupted in cheers and applause. In the midst of the celebration, Claire's hand found Wesley's, squeezing briefly before letting go. The touch was fleeting, but its significance was not. It was an anchor point, a moment of human connection in a world of digital barriers and firewalls. The success of the Gatekeeper project brought Harrison Technologies to new prominence in the cybersecurity world. Industry awards, government contracts, and international recognition flowed in. Wesley found himself featured in technology magazines. His journey from top engineer to stay-at-home dad and back to innovation leader celebrated as an inspirational narrative. The balance that Wesley Parker has achieved between professional excellence and devoted parenting challenges our industry's traditional work models, wrote one influential tech blogger. Maisie took the attention in stride, more interested in the new coding challenges her instructors provided than in the media's fascination with her family story. Through it all, the relationship between Wesley and Claire continued to evolve in small, meaningful increments. They never spoke directly about what was developing between them, both too cautious, too marked by past wounds to risk naming something that might dissolve under scrutiny. But there were moments, a lingering glance across a crowded room, a text message sent late at night simply to share a thought, a hand on an arm that remained there just a moment longer than necessary. The company holiday party found them standing together on the balcony of the venue, overlooking the snow-covered city. "Did you ever imagine this?" Claire asked, her breath visible in the cold air. "A year ago, I mean." Wesley shook his head. "Not even close. A year ago, I was worried about making rent and whether Maisie's winter coat would last another season." He looked at her profile, illuminated by the city lights. "And you? Did you imagine having an 8-year-old security consultant on staff?" Claire laughed, the sound unguarded and genuine. "Definitely not on my 5-year plan." She turned to face him fully. "But I'm glad life doesn't always follow our carefully constructed plans." For a moment, Wesley thought she might say more. might finally put words to the current that had been running between them for months. Instead, she smiled and turned back to the view, but she moved closer to him, their shoulders touching as they stood in companionable silence, watching the snow fall on the city below. As the workday ended, Wesley packed his laptop into his messenger bag, preparing to pick up Maisie from her program. His phone buzzed with a text from his daughter. "Made a breakthrough on my project. Can't wait to show you." He smiled, a surge of pride warming him from within. As he headed toward the elevator, he passed Claire's office. She was still there, as she always was, silhouetted against the evening sky. She looked up as he passed, their eyes meeting through the glass. He raised his hand in a small wave and she nodded in acknowledgement, a simple exchange that somehow contained much more than was visible on the surface. The elevator doors opened, and Wesley stepped inside, pressing the button for the lobby. As the doors began to close, a hand shot through the gap, causing them to reopen. Claire stepped in beside him. "I thought I might walk with you," she said, her tone casual, though the occurrence was unprecedented. "If that's all right." Wesley nodded, surprised but pleased. Of course. They descended in silence, but it was a comfortable one, the kind that exists between people who no longer need to fill every moment with words. In the lobby, they walked together toward the main doors, their pace unhurried despite the late hour. "Maisie mentioned she's working on something special," Claire said as they approached the exit. "Some kind of new security protocol?" Wesley smiled. "She's been very secretive about it. All I know is that it involves what she calls human intuitive authentication, whatever that means." Claire laughed softly. "That child is going to revolutionize this industry before she's old enough to drive." They pushed through the doors into the crisp evening air, their conversation continuing as they walked across the plaza toward the Young Innovators building, two figures moving in sync through the gathering dusk. In her top-floor office, Claire Harrison watched from the window as Wesley met Maisie outside the Young Innovators building. The little girl launched herself into her father's arms, her excitement visible even from this distance, as she gesticulated wildly, likely explaining her latest accomplishment. Wesley listened with his full attention, nodding and smiling as they walked hand in hand toward the subway entrance. Claire had returned to her office after walking with Wesley, drawn back to the window by a pull she didn't fully understand. Her reflection appeared in the glass before her, a successful woman who had built an empire on the ashes of betrayal, who had learned to trust systems and code more than people. Yet something had shifted in that reflection. The hard edges had softened, not into weakness, but into possibility. Her hand rose to the glass, a gesture she herself seemed surprised by. "Sometimes," she whispered to the empty office, "the ones we laugh at are the ones who end up saving everything." She wasn't sure if she meant the child who had saved her company's data or the father who had, perhaps, begun to save something else entirely. Something she had locked away so successfully she had almost forgotten it existed. She turned from the window, gathering her things. For the first time in years, Claire Harrison left the office before sunset, stepping into a world that suddenly seemed filled with unexpected possibilities. As she rode the elevator down to the lobby, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the betrayal that had nearly destroyed her company to the rebuilding that had made it stronger. From the walls she had constructed around herself to the small openings that now allowed light to filter through. She thought about Wesley and Maisie Parker, the unlikely duo who had appeared in her carefully ordered world and somehow changed its fundamental variables. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Claire Harrison found herself looking forward to tomorrow not just for what she would accomplish, but for who she would see. The elevator doors opened onto the empty lobby and she stepped out into the evening, following the same path Wesley and Maisie had taken minutes before, not to catch up with them, but simply to walk in their footsteps for a moment, to feel connected to the new possibility they represented in her life. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, bright points of light in the vastness, separate, distant, but somehow forming patterns that, when viewed together, told stories that had guided travelers for centuries.